Hi, I'm Rainer, and welcome to my train room. And today I've got another structure kit here on the table. And before I explain what it is, this particular kit, I decided I'm going to do this now because I just recently started working on the upper deck at the other end of my layout. And I started with the back corner, but then everything that's on this side of the track, before I really start doing the scenery in there, I kind of need to have this building ready or almost ready to go in there because it's a fairly large building and that's the place it's going to go up there. So I need to make sure that whatever I do for my scenery leaves enough room for this building to fit up there. So this is an old version of the Cornerstone series, the Mountain Lumber Company sawmill. It says Walther 65th anniversary, whenever that is, I don't know. Different packaging than the new ones. I picked this up at a train show sometime last winter. I haven't opened it yet. I hope all the pieces are there. But that way, that's the plan. That's going to be a lumberyard up there. So I want to get this kind of on the go and figure out how much space it's going to need up there. So let's see if I can get this box open. So Walter's instructions are here. Lettering set. Don't know if I'll use any of that. And a multitude of parts. Now, because the box has been opened in the past, I really hope everything is here. No guarantee that it is, but it doesn't look like they tried to build it. It looks like they've just simply opened it and maybe had a look at it. I don't know if this originally was in a plastic bag in this era or not. But anyway, I'm going to just start working my way through this. And like I do with all of the other ones, I'm going to be recording my work with this overhead camera. So let's see how this goes. So I went through the kit and figured out what the major components were, the major outside wall components, the wood framing, windows, trim, doors, things like that, as well as the roof components. And they were all molded in different colors of plastic. Now, the outside walls were this reddish brown, which I just decided I was going to do it something different. So I have painted them in green, which happens to be the same green I used on the window trim in my last structure build, but that's okay. It's going to be over there on another deck at the upper level. Plus, I'm going to do some weathering on those. So I just spray painted those green. The windows and other things like these wood structures were all gray plastic, which to me, it makes kind of more sense for those to be brown. So I used a brown that I had, a spray can of brown outside there. I don't even remember what the particular color was. Again, I'm going to do some weathering on it. This is a sawmill. It's going to be a well-used building. So window frames, doors, wood framing structures, things like that are now painted brown. Kind of makes sense to me. So it'll be green with brown trim on it. Looks kind of like what I can imagine a sawmill could look like. And then there were, I'll just show you, I think on one of these pieces, this was the roofing material. So it was molded in kind of a silver plastic, and I've just painted it flat gray because, again, galvanized metal, things like that outside doesn't stay shiny for very long in the real world. So I think once I weather this, it's going to look a lot more realistic than the silver. Not only that, the silver, because of its molded plastic, has these little swirl marks and things like that in it that were really obvious on the surface of the roof panels. So I didn't want to be dealing with that, so I just thought I would paint them all. So I've got all the roof panels. The larger roof panels are up there right now, and this is also these are also the walls for this smaller building. that's on the as part of the kit. They were also molded in that silver plastic, and they are, I supposed to represent a metal building. So I just painted those with the same gray paint, and so now I'm going to just start to go through these instructions and start assembling the thing. So basically this was my first step. Take it out there, get them painted and let them dry. Some of this paint took a little while before it wasn't tacky anymore, so I actually painted these a couple of days ago and I've let them sit now. So now I'm going to start doing the actual building of this building, and let's see how it works. I've got the base of it temporarily. I just stuck it up there to see how much space it would take. If you look at my earlier video where I talked about doing the scenery up in that corner, this is the building that's going to be going in front of that. So if you haven't watched that video, take a look at it. It just shows you in one video I did scenery right from the beginning to the end. It was an empty corner of the layout, and in front of that on the other side of the tracks I have to leave space to fit this building. So that's why I'm building this building now. So anyway, I'm going to get at it and see how this goes. So once I had all the major components painted, I had to start the assembly. And the first part of the assembly, as with most of these Walther's kits or many of the structure kits, was to put the windows in the wall sections. So the first part was installing all of the window frames to the wall sections, and this kit basically came with two sizes of windows. There's the smaller windows that go in the extra outbuilding. I think it's like a boiler house or power house or something like that. And there's also, and those same smaller windows going up in the, what they call the clerestory of up at the top. And so they go into the smaller wall sections for the smaller building, as well as the long, narrow wall sections for the top part. The larger windows all fit in the main walls for the main building. Now, first of all, the windows go in from the inside of the wall out, so make sure you put the windows in the correct way around. If you look at the smaller windows kind of fit one way or the other, upside down or right side up. They're the same both directions, so it really doesn't matter. But for the larger windows, they are made to look like slider windows. So when you look at the windows from the outside, the general way that vertical slider windows work is that the bottom part slides up inside the top part. That's just so water doesn't drain down in between when it rains outside. So if you want it to be correct, make sure you have a look at the windows, and when you glue them in from the inside, make sure that you're gluing them in the right way around so you don't have some of them upside down and sideways and things like that. So just make sure you get the windows in the right way around when you're gluing them in. So just carefully, just pay attention to that. The other thing about the kit is make sure you, when you start gluing the windows in, you read the directions carefully, because one of the longer wall sections, you actually cut off a section of it so that it only gets 3 windows. So the end walls have a larger doorway, a small man door, and 2 windows. Now, one of those end wall sections doesn't actually get the larger door put in. It's just an opening that the conveyor goes through eventually. But otherwise, those 2 wall sections are identical. The other 2 long walls, one of them is used full length with 5 windows in it. The other one is cut off, and there is a line on the back of it where you cut it off, and you only put 3 windows in that. So just make sure that you follow those instructions and don't just start gluing in windows and glue them into the wrong parts of the wall, especially the part that you're not going to use. For actually gluing the window frames in, I found that when I laid the wall sections face down, I could place all the windows and doors in place and just kind of hold them in place while I dripped a little bit of super glue on the edges. Again, I used the super glue because I had painted the window frames and I wanted to make sure that I got a good glue joint between that and the wall, instead of using a solvent cement, which doesn't always work as well on painted surfaces. So that was a fairly simple procedure in this case, putting all those windows in and all the window frames and the doors in, glued them all into place. Then it was time to glue in the window glass. And if you looked at my previous couple of models that I've built, the window glass just kind of sat flat on the back of the window frames. On this one, the glass actually fits into the window frame. And as a result, if there's any burrs in it or little bits of plastic sticking out from when you cut them off the sprue, they don't fit in properly. So what I found was that I just had a piece of sandpaper on the workbench, and each of the windows, before I slid them into place or before I tried to place them on the window into the window frames, I just sanded all 4 edges just a little bit to make sure that they fit in properly and they sat in there nice and flat. The other thing to do is to take a look at the edges of the windows. They are kind of beveled in one direction, so they fit into the window frame one way better than they do the other way. So just have a look at that and test fit them. Make sure they're all fitting in flat before you glue them in. Once I had the windows set in place, I then just put a little drop of solvent cement on the edges, and that just wicks in and glues them in place. Once I had all the window frames and windows glued into all of the wall sections for both buildings, it was time to start the next stage of the assembly. Then I started assembling the conveyor, and for me, I only used 2 sections of the conveyor. It tells you in the instructions that you can use 2 or 3. I decided to use 2 because the amount of space that I have. If I used a 3rd one, it would run right down onto my tracks going past the building, so that wouldn't fit. So I assembled the 2 of them together, and then there's the end piece for the conveyor that I glued on. And then once those were all glued together, again using solvent cement, I then used some of the leg sections. Now the outside supports, I used 6 of the shorter sections on it, and they basically span the first or the outer section of the conveyor. There are some longer leg sections with it. Just be careful that you don't use the wrong ones. The longer conveyor legs are intended if you have the conveyor going out over water, and so that they would reach to a level that's farther down or at a lower elevation than what your building is sitting. I'm not doing that, so I didn't use the longer legs. I just used 6 of the shorter legs on the kind of the outer section of the conveyor. Once those were glued in place, I then put the supports for the conveyor on the floor and set the conveyor in place there, and then glued those into place again using some of the solvent cement, let it dribble in, and glued all that into place. And in the instructions, it tells you to take the 2 bases of the floor and glue them together. Just make sure that you get the extra part that attaches to the main floor section right side up. So the smooth side goes up. There's a rib around the edges of the bottom of that extra part that the sorting tables will go on. Make sure you get that the right way around, otherwise your holes aren't going to line up on top of it. I just glued those together again, held them together nice and tightly, and dribbled a little bit of solvent cement along the joint and waited for that to set, and that part was done. Once that was all secure, it was time to start doing the sorting tables. And the instructions are pretty clear about this, and you can test fit everything without gluing it, so just follow the instructions carefully. The supports for the sorting tables are 4 identical pieces, but it does matter which way you put them around, which way around you put them, so that the table fits on there. So just read the instructions carefully and fit the tops on them and make sure it all looks good and fits okay before you glue any of it into place. The supports fit into little holes in the floor, so they will stay in place while you do this testing. And then once it's all good, you can glue the whole thing into place. Again, I used a little bit of the solvent cement and just dribbled it into the corners, and it goes in and glues it all into place. Once that was all ready to go, it was time to start assembling the walls. And again, fairly straightforward. There are little ribs on the bottom, on the floor, on the base of the floor to kind of locate everything. Just start with 2 wall sections, hold them in place as securely as you can. Again, I used a little bit of the solvent cement, just kind of dribbled it into the joints. Again, be careful, as I mentioned in my last video, be careful where you put your fingers, so that if a little bit of it leaks through, it doesn't stick to your fingers and make your fingers stick to the walls and remove your paint or anything like that. So just be careful of how you're holding it, and don't use too much of the glue so that it starts leaking everywhere. Just work your way around, get all 4 walls glued into place, make sure they're nice and square, and hold the joints and the corners nice and tight until the glue sets whatever glue you are using. I use solvent cement, but other glues would work. Just make sure you hold them tight until everything is set, so you end up with nice tight corners. The roof would be the next section to put on, and the main roof actually has a little angled piece, 2 little angled pieces that glue at the top to hold the peak of the roof together. So I glued both of those to one half of the roof and then flipped it around and glued it to the other half of the roof to hold all that together. Once that was ready, you could glue the roof into place. Now, what I found was easiest to do was to flip the whole thing upside down, because the base of the thing is a big opening. So I flipped it upside down and made sure that it was all lining up with the little ridges in the roof, on the inside of the roof, that the walls were lining up, and just again used the little small amounts of the solvent cement to glue it all in place. Just held each joint tightly together until it set, and just make sure that the peak of the end walls is actually meeting the peak of the roof when you're doing the one side, that you don't end up with gaps that you didn't notice, and then it's difficult to fix it later. Once the main roof is on, you can do the clerestory walls. There's the 2 long, narrow walls, as well as the little angled end walls. And for the long, narrow walls, take a look at them, because the bottom edge has a bevel to it that meets the roof. The top is kind of squared off where it meets the upper roof. So the bottom edge is beveled to meet the main roof below it. Just make sure you put them on the right way around, because it could be very easy to put them on the wrong way around and just end up with more of a gap at your roof line than you intended. So just have a close look at them before you glue them together. And again, fairly straightforward. Once they're all glued together, then you can place it on the main roof. Now, what I did was I actually drilled a little hole inside there through the main roof, so I could drop wires through, and then I glued a warm white LED to the top clerestory roof, just so that it would be illuminated inside, and I set that roof in place. And for now, I didn't even glue it in place, because that way I can access it later, because it's pretty easy to lift on and off, and it sits in place pretty well. And then the next section was the roof that goes over the sorting tables. Those 2 pieces glue onto leg supports. So what I found was that I just put one of the roof panels flat on the table, angled the other one up and beside it, kind of holding it tight, and then started with one of the leg frame support sections and glued them in one at a time, just making sure I held it nice and tight so the peak would stay nice and tight together. Glued all of that in place, let it set, and once it was ready, flipped it over, pressed it into place. The legs all have pins at the bottom that go into the floor panel or to the base, and then the last part was to push it in tight at the top to the main roof, and then I just put a little bit of super glue in there, because it was a painted surface, so I wanted to make sure that it would grab. And so I used a little bit of that, just dribbled it along the edges and glued it into place, held it in the place for a while until the glue set or started to harden and was holding, and then that was it. Now, I did put an extra little LED light above the one man door at the conveyor end, because it's going to be showing, and there's also another light underneath the roof that is above the sorting table. So once I am ready to finally install this, all of those lights inside there will get wired together and then hang through a hole in the layout to the bottom, so I can have some illumination around there. The smaller building is fairly straightforward. The 4 wall sections glue onto the base, and then there's some chimney stacks that are just glued together, 2 halves each with a little support in between. I put those on top. Now, That building could be used anywhere else in the layout if you wanted, and you could even leave the chimney stacks out, just put a couple of flat patch panels over those holes if you really wanted to. And then the last part was the sawdust burner, and that is just basically two halves that you glue together. It's kind of flimsy, so it's kind of tricky to hold it together until the glue sets, but not terribly difficult. And then there's a round cap that sits up on top. Again, just used some solvent cement for all of that, glued it in and put it together. So this is how it kind of looks on the layout, roughly where it's going to be. I have just temporarily put in a piece of track right here. The other track is over there. The sawdust burner's back here. The little tube is going to kind of sit across like that above the tracks. Can't see it from there. But this is the space I have to work with, and this is why I wanted to get it built, because now I know how much room I have behind the building from that track down, so I can plan my slope or rock cuts or whatever I do back there to leave enough room for the building. Also, the conveyor comes out here, and there's track here. If I would have put another conveyor section out here, it wouldn't have left me any room for track here, and it would have been getting too close to everything. So that's why it's good to kind of know where you're going to put the building before you build it, but also to build the building before you finish the scenery in the area, so you can make sure it all fits. So at this point, I have the building. I still need to do some weathering on it. There's a lot of things I need to do around it, but at this point, I kind of know it's going to fit here. I know how much space it's going to take, and I know how much room I have available for my track work. So overall, I think this was a good kit. The instructions were better than most Walther's kits that I've built. They seem to be fairly clear. They seem to give you the appropriate warnings. I didn't see anything that was, at least I didn't notice anything that was mislabeled. So it was actually, they seem to be pretty good. Just read them carefully, follow the instructions, and hopefully you'll get through it okay. And hopefully this video helps as well. But not a terribly difficult kit to build. It was a little bit quicker, a little more straightforward than some of the other kits I've built. The only thing that was a little bit tricky is the walls are a bit floppy when you're trying to glue the roof on, so just do one section at a time. Don't try to do too much at once. Just be careful about it. Like I said in the earlier in here, this wall section actually comes out of the package as a long full section with 5 window holes in it. It needs to be cut off. You don't want to accidentally glue the windows in from the wrong end and then notice it, because there aren't enough windows in there to do all of them otherwise. So make sure that you're careful about the wall sections and read the instructions and figure out where they need to go. Overall, not a bad kit. I think it's going to be good right here. I need to do some weathering on the roof. It just looks too clean and pretty. I need to do some weathering on the roof and on the walls. I've put a little light here on the wall. I've got a light underneath this roof. I've got a light inside here. Overall, I'm happy with it. Great kit. If you need a lumber mill somewhere on your layout, this is a good way to go. Anyway, hopefully this is helpful for somebody who's thinking about this kit or is working on it. Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. If you found anything helpful in this, please click the like button. Thanks for watching. See you next time.